When I'm upset, I yell, and I don't seem to do that a lot.
Are you upset?
When you come up from...
All right.
I will be second. I'm going to talk to Mom.
Oh, you running it?
Sure.
Okay.
Because I'm still going around the block.
We gotta get it from today.
All right, let's get started. Good morning.
Take some pictures, let me know how it is.
Oh, yeah.
A full symphony besides the ballet is on my bucket list. It's gotta be, I think it's gotta be Bach.
All right, let's open up in prayer this morning. Father God, thank you for the beautiful day today. Thank you for the opportunity to come together as a body to worship and praise you, Lord. I pray that our teachings would be edifying to you today, that all falsehood would be taken out or forgotten, and pray that you would give us an attitude of worship and praise to put aside those concerns in our life and focus on you. And thank you for all the blessings that you give each of us, both the trials and the non-trials. Amen. Where'd my clicker go? Oh. All right. So last weekend, we covered the abolishment of the Abbasid Caliphate. So that was accomplished by the advancing horde of Mongols out of Mongolia. So as the Mongols advanced, they conquered Baghdad, abolished the Caliphate. They pushed the Seljuk Turks back into Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. And they also pushed the Turks down into Egypt, and that became the central point for the ruling class of the Turks and Islam. So Egypt was the focal point. And with that, the city of Cairo grew in popularity, and its economy grew as well. And then we covered basically what stopped the Mongol advance from continuing. Does anybody remember? Pop quiz?
Yes.
What?
The plague.
The plague, right, the Black Plague. So COVID happened and they were forced to work from home. And
They died of boredom.
yeah. So they stopped their advance, and from there, the Turks continued to bring in slave soldiers and advance their territory, and they were able to push back the Mongols. And what was instrumental in the advancements of the Turks was when the Seljuks were defeated, because they were the ruling class of the Turks, it opened up migration to other Turkish tribes into Anatolia. So that's when Itagrul and his son Osman, who was the founder of the Ottoman Empire, they began expanding their pasturage in Turkey. We also covered that as they grew in strength, they advanced their territory up in the Balkans, which is Greece, and that Bosnia and Albania. And they conquered the majority of that territory to the point where 90% of the Greek, Armenians, and Georgians were of Muslim belief. So we also talked about the many of those areas were Christian, Greek Orthodox, and so a lot of them converted as the church, the head church was basically destroyed by the Muslims. So, when you've got a group of people or believers that are part of an institution that crumbles, oftentimes they seek out the same structural, organization and organization, and they converted into Islam because they were of well-organized religion, and they had a hierarchical structure similar to the Greek Orthodox Church. So with that, they brought in a lot of their beliefs into Islam. And so we'll get into the kind of how loose the Islam faith had gotten, and then there's a movement of puritanical Islam that comes up. So this is the territory that the Ottoman Empire conquered, and we'll get into the influence that the Ottoman Empire had, which is a much wider region. All right, so I wanted to kind of cover the structure of the Ottoman Empire because remnants of it exist still today. So when the Ottoman Empire was established, it established Constantinople, or what would become Istanbul, as the capital, the central governing city of the entire empire. So in the background, this is Istanbul. It's a very, very beautiful city. Within Istanbul, it established the Topkapi Saray palace as the governing palace. So that's this structure here, facility.
Is it still there today?
Yep, still there, still being used. So that's inside the palace. So in 1395, the government instituted a manpower tax, which was called the Devshirme. It was a tax on non-Muslims where manpower was taken from the Christian population of the Balkans. So these slaves were educated in the palace schools to be pages in the royal household or soldiers, and officers in the army or administration. So they were enlisted into the state employees. The state was made up of two primary parties, the Turkish or Ghazi party and the slave or Devshirme party. So the Ghazi party, or the Turks, favored expansion against Christian countries in Europe, where the Devshirme party preferred expansion into other Muslim regions. So as sultans succeeded, other sultans, they favored either one party or the other. So throughout the Ottoman Empire's history, you see their strategy change from sultan to sultan. So either they focus on spreading Islam throughout, Muslim controlled areas, less turbulent areas, or they would try to advance further into Europe and Russia. Also China as well. So this meant at times the government officials were made up of Turkish nobility, and at other times they were made up of slave soldiers. The Sultan's authority combined patrimonial, which is like an inherited legal authority, where no distinction between public and private domain exists. So the government or the Sultan owns all of it. There's no distinction between public and private domain. His authority also extends into Islam, so he's essentially the caliph. He controls the spread of Islam and the teaching of it. And it also expands into imperial dimensions. So he's the head of the hierarchy, and then he delegates roles and responsibilities out to local governors, or what are called guilds, which we'll get into, or which are essentially, I guess, what the most similar to us would be like unions. So the soldiers were his slaves, loyal to him personally. Territory of the empire was his personal property. The Sultan's authority was derived from his roles as executor of Sharia. Anybody remember what Sharia means?
Non-royal lineage.
Sharia means the correct path, or the path towards the watering place. What is Sharia? So that's what it means. What is it? Sharia law. Okay. So it's a religious law of Islam. It's the expression of God's command for Muslims. A system of duties that are incumbent upon all Muslims by virtue of their religious belief. And this, by the way they adhere to it, leads to divine favor in the world to come. So it's very similar to the Torah for the Jews, in a sense.
So, do you know if the precepts of Sharia come directly out of the Quran, or is it sort of like the way that things were with the Jews back in the time of Christ, that you had God's basic laws that were in the Bible, and then you had basically the religious leaders that had added a whole bunch of other rules and regulations onto that?
Yes, that. So they established Sharia law from the Quran, the Madra, which were the teachings and sayings of Muhammad, and they basically made a codex law out of it. The Caliphate did. So the Ottoman Empire adopted it from previous caliphates.
You were going on to the ruling elite within the state were given the right to express
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So authority of the Sultan was passed on within the royal family, but the line of succession was established by the stronger son or relative. So they essentially, through their demonstration of power, they earned the right to succeed their father or relative as Sultan. So it was for this reason that if like a Sultan favored a son, he would set him up in a high position within the military or the governing body. But he didn't, state specifically that that son was the successor. So it was kind of a warrior method of establishing a leader. What's that? That was their tradition since, I mean, that, from what I read from the beginning of the Turks, that was their method for establishing a tribal leader. Whoever was the most powerful warrior would lead the tribe. So they extended that into the office of sultan. The ruling elite within the state were given the right to exploit the wealth of the subjects, and in order to be a member of the ruling elite, one had to be cultivated in the High Arabic and manners, which was called the Ottoman way. So the distinction between rulers and the ruled was unique with the Ottoman Empire. Within the first centuries, especially within the first centuries of the Ottoman Empire, so 12th, 13th, 14th century. So within the empire, the ruling elite could be both Muslim and non-Muslim. So alongside the Turkish and the Arab people within the elite were also Jewish refugees from Spain, which were called the Sephardic Jews. And so Sephardic just means Spain in Hebrew. And then the Ashkenazi Jews, which were the Jews that came out of the Great Diaspora in Rome. So they held offices within the government, high offices. So did Greeks, and so did Balkan Christians. The Greeks typically held positions as merchants and bankers within the government. The Jewish people oversaw trade and banking. In fact, there was a very renowned individual within Judaism, his name was Joseph Nasi. So in 1554, he came to Istanbul and he came from Spain to Istanbul, and he used his European business and diplomatic connections to become one of the most influential persons in the role of establishing a French-Ottoman diplomatic relationship. He eventually became a close advisor to Sultan Suleiman. So in 1566, he was made Duke of Naxos by Suleiman and given a monopoly on customs revenues and export of wine. He was also key in establishing the Jewish community in present-day Palestine, or, essentially what's Israel's territory. So he was instrumental in reestablishing a Jewish community in that region to the west of Jerusalem. Ottoman Muslim elites controlled the military and the bureaucracy. Yes, sir.
So how did Sharia work with the other religious beliefs within the Ottoman Empire? Obviously, it wasn't a completely Muslim empire, but the Sultan still ruled those folks?
Yeah. So they were forced to pay a tax. It was a protection tax. But as I mentioned earlier, they were a lot more loose in terms of implementing Sharia law and Muslim beliefs. Okay. And that will change here as I get into
Suleiman,
it. Right. Well, no, actually, Suleiman was...
Well, he's pretty liberal.
He's pretty liberal, yeah. And he was actually an intellectual, so he established a lot of colleges. And
Christians' butts.
He did. He did do that.
Beat up the Pope once. Held his head under water.
Yeah, they were their method of getting to a somewhat peaceful rulership over nations was not pretty. Yeah. So Ottoman Muslims elite controlled the military and the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy or bureaucrats is a term that we hear a lot, or at least I hear a lot in the podcasts I listen to. Does anybody know what a bureaucracy is?
Big bloated donkey. Or elephant.
So a bureaucracy is where all major decisions are made by the state and not by elected officials.
Please do not make me self-reflect. in my professional life.
Yeah, you can't help it working where you work. Yeah, so a bureaucracy is where all decisions are made by the state and not by elected officials. We weren't supposed to be a bureaucratic nation, but here we are.
So then is totalitarian society the same description?
That's probably a more extreme version of bureaucracy.
Well, bureaucracy can happen in any of those types of systems.
Yeah.
As long as whether it's an individual, a ruling board, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, like fascism has an element of bureaucracy. So up until where am I at here? Up until the late 16th century, the state considered its non-Muslim subjects autonomous but dependent on the state, as it was the state who appointed religious and local leaders over each group. So like the Greek Orthodox churches, their priests would be assigned by the Sultan in the state. As long as that person was good with the state. It kind of reminded me, Sarah and I watched called The Great. It's about Catherine the Great in Russia and how she kind of came to power. It's kind of a crude version of it, but I don't know, maybe it's accurate. But there's a episode where the priests or the popes, are they popes? I can't remember. Priests are trying to gain favor with what is the Russian, I forget what they call them.
Like a pope.
Right. Patriarch. Yeah, the czar is their leader. So the whatever they are, priests are trying to gain favor with the czar to earn the office of the lead priest of the Russian Orthodox Church. So similar fashion. As long as they played the game, they were in. The state established mosques throughout its territory that were built to mimic the Dome of the Rock, and this was to show Islam's triumph over Christian rivals. So kind of throw it in your face. And then one group that arose in importance within the state in the 13th century was the Sufi Muslims. They rose because they inspired resistance to the state. So they were kind of the Shia to the Sunni Muslims. So they gained a lot of favor, especially in Anatolia. So Anatolia, or Turkey, became a breeding ground for Sufi beliefs and Sufi-led revolts against state domination. So the Sufi were made up majority of actually true Arabs that were Shia Arabs, Shia Muslim. So the Sufis were strongly influenced by both Shiism and Christianity. So they taught that there were 4 levels of religious belief. Their most important one was Hakika, which was, it means direct experience of the divine reality. This was most important of the belief. So this was, unlike the other, as we get into more puritanical Islam, where Sharia law, it basically supersedes, kind of like they got to the point of the Jews when the Messiah came. Like they placed so much importance on the Torah that they missed the point. So the Sufis believed more in the experiencing of Islam and of God, whereas the more puritanical or the Sunni Muslims believed in the law. They were very dogmatic.
So Baptist and Pentecostal.
Yeah. So that was their first level of belief. Second was the Marifa, which is understanding of the truth. So there was an element of, I don't remember if Gnosticism was the movement that came about, but there was a movement where only set believers in Christianity had access to the secrets of God. Gnosticism. So that was kind of where that came in here. Yeah. So they believed that they had access to the secret knowledge of Muhammad. Right. Then the Tariq, which was initiation of special ceremonies. So this kind of came through from baptism. And then Sharia, so adherence to the law. So not as much importance put on Sharia. And if you ever seen, videos of those Turkish people that spin dance, really fast, those are Sufi Muslims. So, and then by the 15th century, the Sufis were brought under the state control. They lived and marched with soldiers, providing them with magical protections in battle, and they would gird each sultan with the holy sword upon his accession. So they eventually became tools of the state. Then in the early 1600s, you see a rise of puritanical Islamists in the Ottoman Empire. So a more legalistic point of view started taking hold. So theology and mathematics were almost all done away with. Observatories were destroyed. A rigid adherence to Sharia was enforced, and the Puritans asserted themselves against the Sufis and persecuted many of them. Dancing and singing was abolished, and consumption of coffee and tobacco was prohibited.
Replaced by, what do you got over there?
Opium?
Well, no, the stuff they chew all the time
Oh,
is like as
yeah, I forget what that was called.
everybody's stoned all the time. Yeah, what is that called?
Can't remember. I remember some of my buddies in college that were in the Marines would talk about that stuff. All right, what time is it? Finally, some scripture.
This has been fascinating.
Revelations 18, 4 through 20. Then I heard another voice out of heaven say, "My people, come out of her, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not be infected by her plagues. For her sins are sticky mass piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Render to her as she rendered to others. Pay her back double for what she has done. Use the cup in which she has brewed to brew her a double-sized drink. Give her as much torment and sorrow as the glory and luxury she gave herself. For in her heart she says, I sit a queen, I am not a widow, I will never see tomorrow, or I will never see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in a single day, death, sorrow, and famine, and she will be burned with fire, because Adonai God, her judge, is mighty." So remember, we're talking about Babel, the great harlot. "The kings of the earth who went whoring with her and shared her luxury will sob and wail over her when they see the smoke as she burns, standing at a distance for fear of her torment. They will say, Oh no, the great city Babel, the mighty city, in a single hour your judgment has come. The world's businessmen weep and mourn over her, because no one is buying their merchandise anymore. Stocks of gold and silver, gems and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, all rare woods, all ivory goods, all kinds of things made of scented wood, brass, iron, and marble, cinnamon, cardamom, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, flour, grain, cattle, sheep, horses, chariots, and bodies, and people's souls. The fruits you lusted for with all your heart have gone. All the luxury and flashiness have been destroyed, never to return. The sellers of these things who got rich from her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and mourning and saying, "Oh no, the great city used to wear fine linen, purple and scarlet. She glittered with gold, precious stones, and pearls. Such great wealth in a single hour ruined. All the shipmasters, passengers, sailors, and everyone making his living from the sea stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke as she burned, 'What city was like the great city?' And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, saying, 'Oh no, the great city, the abundance of her wealth made all the ship owners rich. In a single hour she is ruined. Rejoice over her, heaven, rejoice, people of God, emissaries and prophets, for in judging her, God has vindicated you.'" So what's the imagery we're seeing here?
It looks like a very sudden collapse of, in this case, referring to Babylon, so whatever this empire is.
Right.
Very sudden.
And it seems like she had a lot of influence on surrounding nations, right? Through her economy, through trade relations, both land and sea, which meant this nation was very wealthy. And through her destruction, the wealth and economies of the surrounding nations also plummets. So a lot of the surrounding nations rely on her for their economy. Why do I bring this up? So the economy of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman conquest had won control over all major trade routes, both land and sea, including the Black Sea, the Aegean, the Mediterranean, and the Arabian Sea. So they had control of the market trade through sea in that whole region. The expanding territories had provided the empire with silk, yarn, textiles, fruit, rice, beans, wheat, sugar, cotton, spices, coffee, and metals. Silk, spices, cotton, iron, opium, rugs, and other products were shipped across the Black Sea to Crimea, where they were carried into Ukraine, Poland, and Russia. And they also conducted the similar trade with Europe through both the Mediterranean Sea and through Anatolia, up through Greece. The empire once again established Mecca as a central trade hub. In fact, they rebuilt the Kaaba in 1631 out of granite stones, which is the structure they built is the one that stands today, the Kaaba. Pilgrims would finance their Hajj, which is the pilgrimage journey that they take every year to Mecca. So they would finance that journey by bringing goods to sell in Mecca and returning with goods that they acquired in Mecca. So they'd bring those back home. So Mecca became not only a religious focal point, but a economical and trade focal point once again. The empire built colleges, hospitals, bridges, libraries, workshops, and mills. So if you can imagine in Anatolia, which up until the conquering of the Byzantine Empire by the Ottoman Empire, that region was under Byzantine rule, which during that time, the last 100 years, the Byzantine Empire was essentially entered into the Dark Ages. So they were economically poor. There was plagues, diseases, death. So here comes a nation that rebuilds not only halts the recession that they're going through, but advances them both technologically and economically. So it was a huge change in economic status for them. So you can imagine the attitude that they had towards the Ottoman Empire was positive, for sure. Even so much so that under the Byzantine Empire, the population of Constantinople was between 50 and 60,000 people. So that was towards the end of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which was the fall of Byzantine Empire to the Ottoman Empire was in 1453. So at that point, when the Constantinople was at its highest population, it was between 50 and 60,000 people. And then in 1500, some 50, 75 years later, the population grew to over 700,000 people in Constantinople or Istanbul. So a huge flux in people and a huge flux in economy. So, and I mentioned guilds, which were essentially kind of like unions. So guilds were the basic unit for the control over urban population. Merchants, craftsmen, transport workers, entertainers, and prostitutes were organized into corporate bodies to enforce economic discipline and facilitate administration. So when it says economic discipline, that's basically the government saying, this is the price that you will sell your product at. There will be no free market competition. The authorities regulated entry into trades, opening of new shops, and types and quality of merchandise produced. So if Sarah wanted to start up a business, she would need to get approval from the state in order to do so. Maximum prices designed to protect consumer interests were set by the state, as I mentioned. Weights and measures were regulated by government inspections, and guilds were expected to supply workers to accompany military campaigns and provide labor services. So the guilds or the unions were basically the enforcers of these rules. So that was the economy of the Ottoman Empire. Very advanced, very influential. Most of the surrounding regions relied on trade with the Ottoman Empire. India, Russia, even China dealt with a lot of trade with the Ottoman Empire. Europe, Africa. Under the Ottoman Empire, the spread of Islam spread first from Egypt. It spread to Central and Eastern Africa, which included Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya. It would have continued to spread if the Europeans wouldn't have colonized Africa in the late 19th and early 20th century. In Central Africa, Chad and Niger had a huge population of Muslim believers, and that Islam was spread through merchants, teachers, and settlers into Central Africa. Islam spread into Indonesia and the Malay Peninsula, so Malaysia. Muslim schools, scribes, poets, and intellectuals flocked to India seeking patronage of new regimes. They organized colleges and opened the way for conversion of Indian peoples to Islam. So eventually 20 to 25% of the populace would convert to Islam in India. By the 17th century, mosques had appeared along the trade routes between Inner Asia and China. Much of the populace in Inner Asia outside of Mongolia and Tibet became Muslim. And then during the Ming period, which in China was 1368 to 1644. The name Hui was applied to Chinese of Muslim faith. So Muslims who lived in China adopted the speech, names, manners, clothing, and other outward appearances. Muslim writers attempted to show how Islam and Confucianism could be reconciled and how Chinese mythology and Islamic history were congruent. So Islam during the Ottoman Empire had spread into Africa. I mean, it was already present in northern Africa, but it had reached central, western, southwestern Africa. It had reached India. It reached Malaysia, reached Asia, China, and up into Russia as well. And I had a map that showed the influence, but for some reason it got deleted. But the region, it makes this map look small in comparison. This is the territory they controlled, but their influence was much, much bigger.
Largest empire in world history ever.
So I'm out of time. Any comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Was the word cat, K-H-A-T, the shoe that you were speaking of?
Yes.
Yes. I think that's it.
I had to look that up. Yeah, it's cop.
Because they spell it with a Q sometimes.
Does it say what it is? It like a hallucinogen?
Cat is
Hallucinogen?
cat, however you want to pronounce it, is typically chewed like tobacco, then retained in the cheek and chewed intermittently to release the active drug, which produces a stimulant-like effect. Dried cat leaves can be made into tea or chewable pastes. Cat can also be smoked or even sprinkled on tea.
Yes. Hallucinogenics.
So if you don't like
Yeah,
the
but enough
cat,
of it.
there's some options.
Yeah. All right. Next weekend we'll get into kind of the ascension of the Ottoman Empire, and then we'll follow that up with leading up to present day Islam and its influence, and then from there we'll get back into, we'll correlate. I'll attempt to make a correlation between the Babylon the harlot and the statue of Daniel, all that into this lesson.
Were you asserting today that Revelation 18 has been fulfilled already?
No, because as we'll get into, this nation at some point will be revived,
Yes.
and so I wanted to point out what the economy was like and what that revival will appear like. I mean, it will essentially obtain or even exceed,
It's coming.
yeah, the influence it had, and both religious and economical. All right. Break.